we actually did get some big time breaking quarterback news today. Speaking of breaking, Carson Wentz tends to break a lot, and he does have currently a foot issue that apparently is going to keep him out 5 to 12 weeks, according to the report. Were you interested in the prospect Carson Wentz in Indianapolis heading into the season?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, anytime you see a quarterback that struggled as much as Carson Wentz did last season, to see him get a fresh start, and I think you sort of have this hope that he can kind of return to form back in his sort of heyday with the Eagles, and I believe he's joined with his old offensive coordinator at that point, and he's now loaded up with weapons with one of the stronger offensive lines in the NFL, which is really what he was lacking last season. That combination, all of a sudden, you have the thoughts that, oh man, Carson Wentz, who's now from a fantasy perspective, is being drafted at like QB 18, 19, could be a real value as an overall QB1 next season with the amount of weapons that he has. So when you see an injury like this, yeah, it's certainly disheartening in a sense, because now, one, you drafted early, obviously that kind of sucks. But then two, it's like, what happens with all the weapons now? It's like, what happens to the run game? Is the run game still efficient? What happens to the wide receiver game? Do they have, as much upside as, we would have hoped to have seen with Carson Wentz, in clean pockets, for example? We know he's a good quarterback. It's just a matter of, could he get enough time to throw the ball? And it obviously looked like that wasn't the case last season. And we were obviously hoping for that to be the case this season. So now it's up to Jacob Eason. And he's kind of known for having a good arm, but quite literally didn't play a snap last year. So we'll see.
Hey, you're not giving enough credit to my boy, Sam Allinger. Hook him. I'm just saying,
Fair enough.
Yeah. The undrafted. But either way, it doesn't look very tantalizing of an offense to want to get involved with. What do you think this does for the weapons around him? Obviously, T.Y. Hilton, you have to assume, takes a step back. People are looking at Paris Campbell and giving him some love. And of course, Michael Pittman, last year's second round pick. You have to assume that everyone in this passing offense is going to be a downgrade for you. Am I not correct?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, again, I think everyone had some upside. Again, and a lot of this kind of comes down to like ADP value from a fantasy perspective. Like Michael Pittman, Paris Campbell, like, you were expecting them to not get drafted very high. T.Y. Hilton, for example. So in a sense, the players who are coming off of, let's say, bad seasons with their teams from an offensive perspective are quite literally at the most discounted rate that they could be. And that's where these guys were, especially in these later rounds. So what that means is that if you get a good quarterback in place, like a Carson Wentz, you might have some upside, and all of a sudden, they become not league winners, let's say, but they could actually do some damage for you when you need some flex starts week to week. Now Carson Wentz is no longer there, so it's really difficult to say. I mean, there's a lot of question marks, and I am not necessarily someone who wants to invest in the ambiguity. Some people do. Some people see that as like the chaos's ladder sort of mentality, and that's fine. Go for it. But yeah, I'm not sure about them this year.
Chaos's ladder. That reminds me of when Game of Thrones was actually enjoyable to watch.
That's right.
But as far as, I mean, overall, just obviously this offense, you just got to slide it. I know you guys definitely talk a lot of Dynasty on your show as well. Dynasty perspective on Carson Wentz. Is this a guy that you're trying to just sell the farm on right now? Or what are you trying to do with him? Because you have to think that the Colts would want to see him play a full season at some point. But now there's that question. You have acquired this guy who's always hurt, and he's hurt again.
Yeah, it's very tricky to say. It's all right. Let's take a look at some of the facts that we know. It's like Carson Wentz is still a young quarterback, right? So Carson Wentz is only 28 years old. He's not old by any stretch of the imagination from a quarterback perspective. We've seen quarterbacks that have had injuries in the past, e.g. Matthew Stafford, who still ends up producing year in and year out when he actually does get the chance to play. So one gentleman that we follow who's actually been on the Commish pod a few times is Dr. Edwin Porras. He's over on Twitter. He's very good at giving sort of these types of updates. And so this is what they know about the Carson Wentz injury. So this was an update as of 5 hours ago. The reports for the injury is what's called a chronic fifth avulsion fracture. Okay. So what that means is, and they don't have a huge sample size of how many players have been affected with this, but in a small study, athletes return to activity 4 to 6 weeks from the point of their surgery, which is what Carson Wentz is going to have. Then they return to full practice 6 to 8 weeks. Then they return to games 12 weeks in after that. And then the caveat to all this is that there's minimal reason that this should linger. So while it's an unfortunate scenario from a redraft perspective, on a dynasty perspective, I actually don't think this is going to, or it shouldn't hurt Carson Wentz's value long-term. If you have Carson Wentz, I mean, if you want to sell him, go ahead, but I think you should stash him and then wait until this thing heals up, and then he should be back in the lineup, no problem.
You just have to assume that this entire season is gone. Even when he does come back, a 12-week injury, the prospect of picking up Carson Wentz for a playoff run is not one that I foresee myself pursuing.